The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Seoul District Court as Judge Park Tae-ho settled into his chair. It was March 15, 1988, and the courtroom buzzed with the usual activity of another busy day. Clerks shuffled papers, lawyers whispered to their clients, and the judge prepared to hear a series of minor traffic violations. Park Tae-ho had been a judge for 15 years. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and thick glasses that he constantly adjusted. He believed deeply in order and tradition. In his mind, society worked best when everyone knew their place and followed the rules. Women, he thought, should be careful and quiet. Men should be strong and responsible. This was how he had been raised, and this was how he saw the world. The first case of the day was a speeding ticket. The defendant was a woman named Lee Min-ah. She was in her early 30s with short black hair and wore a simple dark suit. She stood at the defendant's table with her hands folded in front of her, looking calm but tired. Her eyes showed signs of someone who had not slept well. Judge Park looked at the paperwork. The woman had been caught driving 40 kilometers over the speed limit on the highway leading to Seoul National University Hospital. The police officer had written that she seemed to be in a great hurry and had appeared upset when stopped. Park looked up at Lee Min-ah. She was young and pretty, he thought, probably works at the hospital as a secretary or maybe a nurse. Young women these days always seem to be rushing around, not taking time to be careful and responsible like they should. Lee Min-ah, he said in a stern voice that echoed through the courtroom. You were driving very fast, much too fast. This is dangerous behavior. Lee Min-ah nodded quietly. Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Any excuse for this reckless driving? Lee Min-ah hesitated for a moment. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. I was called to the hospital for an emergency, Your Honor. Someone's life was in danger. Judge Park made a dismissive sound. An emergency? What kind of emergency requires a young woman like you to drive so dangerously? Were you late for work? Did you oversleep? Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. A few lawyers exchanged glances. But Lee Min-ah remained calm and respectful. No, Your Honor. I was called because a patient needed immediate surgery. I am a doctor. Park looked at her with surprise, then suspicion. She was so young, so quiet. In his experience, doctors were usually older men who spoke with confidence and authority. This woman seemed too soft, too gentle to be a real doctor. Maybe she was a nurse who was trying to make herself sound more important. A doctor? He said with a slight smile. What kind of doctor? I am a cardiac surgeon, Your Honor. Some people in the courtroom began to whisper. Judge Park heard the murmurs but ignored them. He was convinced this young woman was exaggerating her importance. Perhaps she assisted real doctors, or maybe she worked in a clinic doing simple procedures. But a heart surgeon, that seemed impossible. A young lady, he said, his voice becoming more stern. I have been a judge for many years. I can tell when someone is not being completely honest with me. You may work at the hospital, but I doubt you are what you claim to be. Real surgeons are serious people with great responsibility. They do not drive recklessly on public roads. Lee Min-ah's face remained calm, but her shoulders tensed slightly. Your Honor, I understand your concern about road safety. I do not usually drive over the speed limit, but that night a patient was dying, and I was the only surgeon available who could perform the operation needed to save his life. Judge Park waved his hand dismissively. Enough excuses. You young women today think you can do whatever you want. You think you can drive fast and break rules just because you have some small job at a hospital. You need to learn to be more responsible and careful. He looked down at his paperwork and wrote something quickly. I am fining you 500,000 won. This is a large fine, but maybe it will teach you to slow down and think before you act. Young women like you need to remember that your actions have consequences. You could have hurt someone with your careless driving, Lee. Min-ah bowed her head respectfully. Yes, Your Honor, I will pay the fine. And in the future, Judge Park continued, remember that whatever small job you have at the hospital, it is not more important than public safety. Leave earlier for work. Plan better. Be more responsible. The courtroom was very quiet. Lee Min-ah accepted the judgment without another word. She gathered her small purse and walked toward the exit. As she passed the gallery where some people were sitting, several of them looked at her with expressions of sympathy and anger. They seemed to know something that Judge Park did not. After she left, the whispers in the courtroom grew louder. But Judge Park was already calling the next case. He had no idea that the quiet young woman he had just lectured was one of the most respected heart surgeons in all of South Korea, and that his own life would soon depend on her extraordinary skills. Judge Park Tae-ho was eating lunch at his desk when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky and scared. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Choi. "Park Tae-ho, you need to come to Seoul National University Hospital right now. Your wife collapsed at the market. They brought her here in an ambulance." The judge dropped his chopsticks. His heart began to beat very fast. Kim Soon-ja was only 45 years old and had always been healthy. They had been married for 20 years, and she had never been seriously sick. He grabbed his coat and ran from the courthouse. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever, even though it was only 15 minutes. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. He kept thinking about his wife's smile that morning when she kissed him goodbye. At the hospital, a nurse led him to the emergency room. Kim Soon-ja was lying on a bed with many wires and tubes connected to her body. Her face was very pale, and her breathing was shallow. A young doctor was checking the machines around her bed. "What happened to my wife?" Judge Park asked, his voice breaking. The doctor looked up from his clipboard. "Mr. Park, I am Dr. Kim. Your wife had a very serious heart attack. Her main artery is completely blocked. She needs emergency surgery right away or she will die." Judge Park felt dizzy. He sat down in a chair next to the bed and held his wife's cold hand. "Surgery? What kind of surgery?" "She needs something called a coronary bypass. It is a very difficult operation. We need to take a blood vessel from another part of her body and use it to go around the blocked artery. Only our best surgeon can do this type of operation." "Then get your best surgeon," Judge Park said quickly. "Money is not a problem. I will pay anything. Just save my wife." Dr. Kim nodded. "We have already called our head of cardiac surgery. She is the best heart surgeon in Korea. She has done this operation hundreds of times. Your wife will be in very good hands." "When will the surgeon be here?" Judge Park asked. "She is already here. She is preparing for the surgery right now. We should be able to start in about an hour." Judge Park felt a little relief. At least his wife would have the best doctor. He imagined an older man with many years of experience, someone serious and skilled who could save Kim Soon-ja. As they wheeled his wife toward the operating room, Judge Park followed. The hallways were busy with nurses and doctors moving quickly. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. This gave him some comfort. Near the operating room, he saw a group of doctors talking quietly. They were looking at X-rays and discussing something important. One of them was a woman with short black hair wearing green surgical clothes. She looked familiar, but Judge Park was too worried about his wife to think clearly. "Mr. Park," Dr. Kim said, "I want you to meet Dr. Lee Minna. She will be performing your wife's surgery." Judge Park looked up and his mouth fell open. It was the young woman from his courtroom that morning, the woman he had lectured about being responsible, the woman he had fined for speeding, the woman he had thought was lying about being a doctor. Dr. Lee Minna looked at him calmly. If she remembered him from the morning, she did not show it on her face. She was completely professional. "Mr. Park, your wife is very sick, but I believe, so we can help her. The surgery will take about 4 to 6 hours. It is complicated, but I have done this operation many times before." Judge Park stared at her. He remembered his words from that morning about her being irresponsible, about her having a small job at the hospital. He felt his face become hot with embarrassment. You are really a heart surgeon?" he asked, quietly. "Yes, Mr. Park. I am the head of cardiac surgery here at Seoul National University Hospital. I have been a surgeon for 8 years. Other doctors nearby began to whisper. Judge Park heard one nurse say to another, "Did you hear what happened? In court this morning, Judge Park fined Dr. Lee for speeding when she was rushing to save Mr. Choi's life." Another doctor said, "Dr. Lee is famous all over Asia. She studied at Johns Hopkins University in America. She has invented new ways to do heart surgery that save more lives." Judge Park felt sick to his stomach, but not because he was worried about his wife. He was realizing how badly he had treated this woman who might now save his wife's life. Dr. Lee Min-ah seemed to understand his feelings. She spoke gently. "Mr. Park, right now, the only thing that matters is helping your wife. I will do everything I can to save her life. That is my job and I take it very seriously." She turned to the other doctors. "Let's begin the surgery." As they wheeled Kim Soonja into the operating room, Judge Park sat down heavily in a waiting room chair. His hands were shaking, and he felt terrible. The woman he had dismissed and insulted just hours ago was now the only person who could save his wife's life. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was going to be a very long afternoon. The operating room doors closed with a soft click, and Judge Park was left alone in the waiting area. The clock on the wall showed 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dr. Lee Min-ah had said the surgery would take 4 to 6 hours. Judge Park settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair and tried to stay calm. The waiting room was quiet, except for the sound of his own breathing and the distant beeping of medical machines. Other families sat in similar chairs, all waiting for news about their loved ones. Judge Park had never felt so helpless in his life. After an hour, a young doctor came out to update the families. When he reached Judge Park, he said, "The surgery is going well so far. Dr. Lee is working on the most difficult part now. Your wife's heart was more damaged than we first thought, but Dr. Lee has seen cases like this before." Judge Park nodded, but his worry grew. More damage than they thought. What did that mean? As the hours passed, nurses and doctors walked by the waiting area. Judge Park began to listen to their conversations. He heard them talking about Dr. Lee Min-ah, and what he learned surprised him more and more. "Dr. Lee is using that new technique she developed," one nurse said to another. "The one she wrote about in the American Medical Journal." "She's amazing," the other nurse replied. "I heard she was the youngest person ever to become head of cardiac surgery at a major hospital in Korea." Judge Park's ears perked up. He had not known any of this information that morning when he was lecturing her about responsibility. A little later, 2 older doctors sat down near Judge Park. They were tired and drinking coffee after their own long day. Judge Park pretended to read a magazine while he listened to them talk. "I heard Dr. Lee is in surgery with Judge Park's wife," one doctor said. "Really? That's interesting. Did you hear what happened this morning in court?" "No. What happened?" "Judge Park gave Dr. Lee a big fine for speeding. He lectured her about being irresponsible. He had no idea who she was." The first doctor shook his head. "That's terrible. Dr. Lee was probably rushing to save someone's life. She always drives carefully, except when there's an emergency." "I know. She's saved more lives than any other surgeon in this hospital. She works 18 hours a day sometimes, and she never complains." Judge Park felt his face burning with shame. He wanted to disappear. The second doctor continued, "Do you remember when she first came here 8 years ago? She was so young, and some of the older doctors didn't want to work with her because she was a woman. But she proved herself quickly. More than that, she became better than all of them. That heart valve repair technique she invented has been used in hospitals all over the world now. She's saved thousands of lives." Judge Park put down his magazine. He had fined and lectured someone who had saved thousands of lives. Around 6 o'clock, more family members of Dr. Lee's other patients began arriving. Judge Park heard them talking about her with great respect and gratitude. An elderly man said to his daughter, "Dr. Lee saved my life 3 years ago." The other doctors said, "There was no hope, but she tried a new surgery that no one else knew how to do." A middle-aged woman added, "She operated on my son when he was born with a heart problem. Now he's healthy and plays soccer. Dr. Lee visits him every year on his birthday to check on him." Judge Park began to understand that Dr. Lee Min-ah was not just any doctor. She was special. She was someone who dedicated her entire life to saving others. At 7 o'clock, a nurse came to update him again. "The surgery is taking longer than expected, but that's normal for this type of operation. Dr. Lee is being very careful to make sure everything is perfect." Judge Park nodded. He trusted Dr. Lee now, even though he had not trusted her that morning. Around 8 o'clock, He overheard two medical students talking. "I hope I can work with Dr. Lee during my training," one said. "She's the best teacher in the hospital. She's patient and kind, but she expects you to work very hard." I heard she still studies every night to learn new techniques. Even though she's already the best, she wants to keep getting better. Judge Park closed his eyes. This woman spent her days saving lives and her nights studying to save even more lives. And he had treated her like a careless young girl who didn't know better. At 9 o'clock, the operating room doors finally opened. Dr. Lee Minna walked out, still wearing her green surgical clothes. She looked tired but calm. Judge Park stood up quickly, his heart pounding. Dr. Lee approached him with a small smile. "Mr. Park, the surgery was successful. Your wife is going to be fine." Judge Park felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." "The surgery was more complicated than we expected. Your wife's heart had 3 blocked arteries, not just one, but we were able to fix all of them. She will need to rest for several weeks, but she should make a full recovery." Judge Park began to cry. He could not help himself. This woman had just saved his wife's life after he had treated her so badly. Dr. Lee Minna put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your wife is strong. She will be fine." 3 days after the surgery, Kim Soonja finally opened her eyes. Judge Park had been sitting by her hospital bed for hours, holding her hand and waiting for this moment. When she looked at him and smiled, weakly, he felt like his heart might burst with happiness. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, squeezing her hand. "Tired," Kim Soonja whispered, "but alive. The nurses told me I had a very serious operation." Before Judge Park could answer, there was a gentle knock on the door. Dr. Lee Minna entered the room with a clipboard and stethoscope around her neck. She looked well-rested and professional, wearing a white coat with her name embroidered on it. "Good morning, Mrs. Kim. I'm Dr. Lee Minna. I'm very happy to see you awake." Kim Soonja tried to sit up a little. "Are you the doctor who saved my life?" Dr. Lee smiled warmly. "I am one of the doctors who helped you, yes. How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thank you. My husband told me you operated on me for many hours." Judge Park watched as Dr. Lee checked his wife's heart with her stethoscope and looked at the machines monitoring her condition. Her hands were gentle but confident. Everything she did showed years of training and experience. "Your surgery went very well," Dr. Lee explained to Kim Soonja. "Your heart had 3 blocked arteries. We took healthy blood vessels from your leg and used them to create new paths for blood to flow around the blocked areas. It's like building new roads when the old roads are closed." Kim Soonja nodded, trying to understand. "Will my heart be normal again?" "With time and rest, your heart should work much better than before. You'll need to take some medicines and change some things about how you eat and exercise, but you should be able to live a long, healthy life." Judge Park listened to every word. Dr. Lee's explanation was clear and kind. She spoke to his wife like she was talking to a family member, not just another patient. "Doctor," Kim Soonja said, "my husband told me you are very young to be such an important surgeon. How did you become so skilled?" Dr. Lee looked a little embarrassed by the compliment. "I studied very hard for many years. I went to medical school here in Korea. Then I studied in America at Johns Hopkins Hospital for 4 years. I've been doing heart surgery for 8 years now." "Johns Hopkins," Judge Park repeated quietly. He knew that was one of the most famous hospitals in the world. After Dr. Lee left to check on other patients, Judge Park sat quietly with his wife. He was thinking about everything he had learned about Dr. Lee over the past 3 days. Later that afternoon, Dr. Choi, the hospital director, came to visit Kim Soonja. He was an old friend of Judge Park's family. "How are you feeling, Soonja?" Dr. Choi asked. "Much better, thanks to Dr. Lee," Kim Soonja replied. Dr. Choi smiled. "You are very lucky to have Dr. Lee as your surgeon. She is the best heart doctor in Korea, maybe in all of Asia." Judge Park leaned forward. "Dr. Choi, can you tell me more about Dr. Lee? I want to understand who saved my wife's life." Dr. Choi sat down in the chair next to the bed. "Dr. Lee Min-ah is truly special. She graduated first in her class from Seoul National University Medical School. Then she went to America, where she learned the most advanced heart surgery techniques. When she came back to Korea, She was only 28 years old, but she was already better than doctors with 20 years of experience. What makes her so good? Kim Soonja asked. Many things. She has natural talent, but more importantly, she works harder than anyone else. She studies medical journals every night. She travels to other countries to learn new techniques. She has invented 3 new ways to do heart surgery that are now used in hospitals around the world. Judge Park felt his stomach tighten with shame as he remembered his words from 3 days ago. Dr. Choi continued, "But what makes her most special is how much she cares about her patients. She has saved over 800 lives in 8 years. She works almost every day, sometimes for 16 hours straight, and she trains young doctors to be better surgeons. She seems so humble," Kim Soonja observed. "That's another thing that makes her remarkable. She never talks about her achievements. She just works quietly and saves lives. Last year, the American Heart Association gave her an award for her research, but she was too busy with surgery to go to America to receive it." Judge Park stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city and thought about Dr. Lee driving fast through these streets 3 nights ago, rushing to save someone's life. He had assumed she was being careless and irresponsible. In reality, she was risking her own safety to save another person. "Dr. Choi," Judge Park said without turning around, "Dr. Lee got a speeding ticket 3 days ago. She was rushing to the hospital for an emergency surgery. That sounds like her. She will do anything to save a patient's life." Judge Park turned back to face his friend. "I was the judge who gave her that ticket. I fined her and lectured her." "About being responsible?" Dr. Choi's eyes widened with surprise. Kim Soonja gasped softly. "I had no idea who she was," Judge Park continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I made assumptions about her based on how she looked. I thought she was just a young woman who was being careless." The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Kim Soonja reached for her husband's hand. "The woman who saved my life," she said gently, "was rushing to save someone else's life when you stopped her." Judge Park nodded, feeling the full weight of his mistake. 1 week after his wife came home from the hospital, Judge Park sat in his office staring at a piece of paper on his desk. He had written Dr. Lee Minna's name and phone number on it 3 days ago, but he had not been brave enough to call her yet. Every time he looked at the paper, he remembered that morning in court when he had lectured her about responsibility. He remembered the way she had stood quietly and accepted his harsh words without defending herself. Now he knew she had been rushing to save a man's life, and later that same day, she had saved his wife's life too. Judge Park picked up the phone and dialed the hospital number. His hands were shaking slightly. "Seoul National University Hospital Cardiac Surgery Department," a voice answered. "Hello, this is Judge Park Tae-ho. I would like to speak with Dr. Lee Minna, please." "1 moment, please." Judge Park waited, his heart beating fast. He had practiced what he wanted to say, but now his mind felt blank. "Hello, this is Dr. Lee Min-a. Dr. Lee, this is Judge Park. You operated on my wife, Kim Soonja, last week." "Yes, of course. How is Mrs. Kim feeling?" "She is doing very well. Thanks to you. Dr. Lee, I was wondering if I could meet with you. There is something important I need to discuss with you." There was a pause. "Is this about Mrs. Kim's medical care?" "No, her recovery is going perfectly. This is about something else, something personal." "I see. I have some free time tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock if that works for you." "Yes, that would be perfect. Should I come to the hospital?" "Actually, there is a quiet coffee shop near the hospital called Café Seoul. Would you prefer to meet there?" Judge Park was surprised that she suggested meeting outside the hospital. "Yes, that sounds good. I will see you tomorrow at 4. The next day, Judge Park arrived at Café Seoul 15 minutes early. He ordered coffee and sat at a table in the corner, watching the door nervously. At exactly 4 o'clock, Dr. Lee Min-a walked in. She was wearing casual clothes instead of her white doctor's coat, and she looked younger and more relaxed. "Judge Park," she said with a polite bow as she approached the table. "Dr. Lee, thank you for meeting with me. Please sit down," she ordered. Tea and sat across from him. There was an awkward silence for a moment. "Dr. Lee," Judge Park began, "I asked to meet with you because I owe you a very sincere apology." Dr. Lee looked surprised. "An apology for what?" "For how I treated you in court last week. I was rude and disrespectful. I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong." Dr. Lee sipped her tea quietly and waited for him to continue. I thought you were just a young woman who was driving carelessly. I lectured you about responsibility without knowing anything about you or why you were speeding. I was prejudiced and unfair. Judge Park, you were doing your job. Traffic safety is important. No, Judge Park said firmly. I was not just doing my job, I was making judgments about you based on your age and gender. If you had been an older man, I would have listened more carefully to your explanation about the medical emergency. Dr. Lee set down her teacup and looked at him thoughtfully. Judge Park, I appreciate your honesty. Many people make assumptions about others without realizing it. But you are one of the most accomplished doctors in Korea. You have saved hundreds of lives. You were rushing to save someone that night, and I treated you like you were irresponsible. Judge Park, may I ask you something? Of course. When you saw me in court that day, what did you think about me? Judge Park felt his face become warm with embarrassment. I thought you were probably a nurse or secretary at the hospital. I thought you were too young to be a real doctor. I thought you were making excuses for careless driving. And why did you think those things? Judge Park was quiet for a long moment. Because you are a young woman, because I have old-fashioned ideas about what doctors should look like, because I believe that important jobs are done by older men. Dr. Lee nodded. Judge Park, you are not the first person to make those assumptions about me. It happens often, but you are the first person to apologize and think deeply about why it happened. How can I make this right? Judge Park asked. You are already making it right by recognizing your bias and talking about it openly. But if you really want to help, you could think about how this happens in your courtroom with other people too. Judge Park leaned forward. What do you mean? You made assumptions about me because I am a young woman. Do you think you might make assumptions about other people for other reasons? Poor people, young people, people who dress differently. Judge Park thought about this. You're right, I probably do. The good news is that once you recognize it, you can work to change it. They talked for another hour. Dr. Lee told him about the challenges she had faced as a young female surgeon and how important it was for people in positions of power to examine their own biases. When they parted, Judge Park felt like a different person. The next week, he began attending training, sessions about unconscious bias. He started paying attention to his own assumptions in court. He began asking himself why he reacted to people the way he did. 6 months later, Judge Park organized bias training for all the judges in his district. He often told the story of Dr. Lee Minna as an example of how wrong assumptions can be. Dr. Lee Minna continued her work saving lives. 2 years later, she became the youngest department head in the hospital's history. But more importantly, her conversation with Judge Park started a movement. Other judges began examining their own biases, and the court system slowly became more fair and just. Sometimes the smallest moments can change everything.